Eve is much more interesting than I am. I just want to make sure that everybody has a little glimpse into what camera does. And I'm going to talk for a second just about the thing that is particularly important to me. I am based out of Washington, D.C. And I think most of you here probably realize that what camera is known the best for is soliciting corrections in the media for the inaccuracies and distortions and flat-out lies that the media likes to tell about Israel. People come to me a lot, and they say it's great work. You guys are doing great work. We're really happy that camera's doing this. But how much of a difference does it really make? And for me, it's particularly important because initially I got my start dealing with Capitol Hill and politicians. I feel bad for them. It's crazy. One of the things that was the most frustrating for me interacting with U.S. politicians, the congressmen, the senators, even the local reps, was the fact that they obviously had hard jobs and they were overextended, and they were working around the clock, and they relied so much on their staff, young people, to give them advice and insight. Well, the staff would come in the morning, and their job was to read the news and make recommendations to their boss based on what they read in the news. And they had to do this on a variety of issues. So a lot of times the most you could hope for was that they remembered a headline. And that's what stuck in their mind, and when they went and briefed their boss, they would regurgitate the last headline that they'd heard, whether or not it was accurate. And that fiction, in many cases, became the congressman or the senator's truth. And it was on what those individual staffers were telling them that they began basing policy. It really was that simple. It was horrifying to watch. So, I mean, at the time I had no idea, at the time I was doing this, I had no idea that camera existed. But once I became introduced to camera, I knew this was the organization that I wanted to work with. Because what seems like sometimes insignificant corrections that camera is able to secure, really, I truly believe, can make life or death differences, particularly when it comes to U.S. policy. So as a DCite, to me, it's particularly poignant. Separate from the corrections, I will tell you that we have a staff of almost 50 people now. We've grown a lot. Unfortunately, because of how many anti-Israel and anti-Semitic areas we need to address. So camera has a curriculum department where we're working very hard to make sure that we get the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic bend out of U.S. school curriculum. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent on this, but I think it's something that I figured out last night. We had another event last night, and people don't realize how much of an issue this curriculum situation is. It's not textbooks. See, I have a child, and I am stunned to see the boy come home with an empty backpack constantly, and where are your books? There's no books. I don't understand what happened to the books. The books aren't there anymore. These kids are being taught based on what teachers are printing off the internet. There are no books. I mean, I've beat my head against a wall yelling that there must be books somewhere, and he just doesn't have them. No, there's no books. So my child in his world studies, because it's not history, it's world studies class now, they're printing off whatever the teacher feels like is a relevant, moving story that she wants the kids to learn. So camera's working diligently to address this issue as well. If this is something, it's particularly important to me because I'm dealing with it at home on a regular basis. So if this is something you want to get more information about, I can talk to you after and chat with you a little bit about our efforts there.
I'm just curious, what grade level are you referring to?
So my son's a sophomore in high school. This is, I had him in private school until 8th grade. This is actually, I am now in the second year of having him in public school. Were it not for the fact that he now has, it would really hurt him, like, socially, I would move him because it was a mistake. It was a mistake to put him in public school. Because of what I'm having to monitor and address flat-out hatred on a regular basis that's coming home. It's coming into our house. I mean, my face is probably red right now because it makes me so upset that this is happening.
Are you talking about specifically about Israel or beyond?
Specifically about Israel. Specifically about how Israelis kill Palestinians.
Wow.
It's It is hatred. It's horrific. So the camera is doing, with a very small budget and a very small staff, we're doing really great work to address that. I mean, not just from me, obviously, but across the U.S. I was talking to one young lady tonight who didn't realize that we have a campus project that's pretty robust. We've got around 85 campuses at this point, and so what we do on campuses is we encourage students to do pro-Israel activities. We fund them. That's key, because the kids may want to have these programs, but they don't have the money. So thanks to generous supporters, we're able to fund these pizza parties, pro-Israel things, where not just do we get the message out about the fact that Israel is a good and wonderful country, but we also make sure that when the kids come to campus, they have a family. And Eve will touch a little bit, I think, maybe tonight on Hillel. Our programs, we make sure that it is a very pro-Israel family that your kids and grandkids are able to become part of. The other thing we have on the campus, which I don't think people know about, so I want to encourage you, if you have kids or grandkids that are college age, we have a fellows program where we actually give the best and brightest pro-Israel students we can find stipends to write articles. So we teach them how to analyze news stories, how to solicit corrections, and then we also teach them how to write accurate stories about Israel for their college and local newspapers. It's one of my favorite programs we do. So Camera is doing a number of projects that are incredibly important and unique. I particularly, since I go out across the country and ask people for help, I really appreciate the fact that we're not duplicating the work of other programs. There are other programs that do things in this space, but we've made sure that if you're going to make a contribution to us, we're using it for something unique. So I hope that you all enjoy our program tonight. Eve is an incredible speaker. I think you'll enjoy it. What I would like to do is turn this over now to our hosts and thank Jerry and Marilyn Stern for opening up their gorgeous home to us. And
I need to stand on this, but I was asked to stand.
You rise to the occasion, Jerry.
We are pleased this evening to have Eve Harow, one of the most passionate, committed, and knowledgeable advocates on behalf of Israel in the world, here with us this evening. Tonight she will share her knowledge of the land of Israel and its people, and she will do so with an extraordinary ability to weave together ancient Jewish history with the beauty, drama, and realities of modern-day Israel. It is an honor to have her share with us her abundant love and pride in the Jewish people and our accomplishments. Eve's extensive activism on a wide range of issues and her 10-year tenure on the City Council of Efrat, Israel, provide her audiences with a unique insight into Israel's political life. She has extensive training in psychology with a master's degree from Pepperdine University, and that background has helped her become a keen observer of and an insightful commentator on Israeli society and religious life. Eve hosted her own radio show called, aptly, Sunday Eve. And she's appeared in numerous media outlets throughout the world. She's based in Israel, but she often meets with international groups and missions from abroad. She appears on educational panels, she teaches advocacy courses, and she writes and speaks extensively in the local and international press. She frequently travels abroad, as she's done this evening, for us, for our benefit, to share her unique analysis and riveting insights with those who live far from the eye of the storm. Eve Harow.
I sound so busy. I guess I am busy. Just to fill in a little, I still have a radio show. It's more of a podcast now every Sunday. There's at least one person in this room who listens to me. I don't know who it is. Called Rejuvenation. It's on the internet. And I am a licensed Israeli tour guide, which is what I do when I'm home. And I take people around the country. But all that started when I moved to Israel over 30 years ago from Los Angeles. And I want to preface by saying I love this country. I love the United States. It has been so important and so special to my people. My husband and I did not move to Israel because we were fleeing the United States. And I hope that no one ever has to do that. We felt that it was special to have a country of our own after all this time, and it's something that we wanted, a place that we wanted to raise our children in. We have 7 children, 4 daughters and 3 sons. They're all grown up now. I have 7 grandchildren as well. And so that's really been the impetus of my life, is to make the Jewish world better, to keep my kids safe as much as I can. So when we first made Aliyah 30 years ago to Efrat, I wasn't really I was taking care of the kids. I was very busy. But I realized that it was just the beginnings of the internet, the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, where things really started to come online, and you could have access to news from everywhere. It wasn't just the paper boy who, right, you heard the boom and then the thing was at your front door, but all of a sudden you could get news from everywhere in every other country. And I realized that the reality I was living and what I was reading about in the newspaper sometimes by accident bore resemblance to each other. So I made it a point to take people around that would come. I live in Gush Etzion in Efrat. Take people around, show them what was really happening. Then I would take them around the country. That also moved into becoming actually a tour guide because I fell in love with the country and I said, I want to do this for real. And so now that's what I do. I take Jews, I take Christians of all stripes, I take people, not whatever it is, around the country. It's never the same because I always see it through the eyes of the people that I'm with, because it really absolutely is an extraordinary place. And I got involved with camera a few years ago. I'm on their Israeli board. So I don't do the analysis, but I'm, perspectiva, because in Israel, camera is also involved with some of the foreign press, not just foreign, haaretz, which is Israeli. As I've said before, and I'll say it again, there is a use for haaretz. We got a puppy a few years ago and had to toilet train it. And every day I went and bought haaretz and put it down on the floor. Okay, so it was, because a lot of times the foreign press picks things up from Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper, so it must be true and it must be right. And it's done an incredible amount of damage. So camera does a lot of work on keeping Haaretz as honest as we possibly can, at least making sure that the editorials are on the editorial page and not on the front page, okay? There's supposed to be a difference there. But also there's other newspapers, The Guardian and BBC, we have the BBC Watch, and there's a lot, and also Arabic press. Okay, what are Israeli Arabs reading in their own language about things, or Israelis in the area? So it's the division over there is very busy as well. But what if I said to you, for example, you turned on the radio sometime last Saturday, and what you heard on the news was 11 people found with bullets in their body. Just like that, right? Technically, that's true. 11 people, even more, but 11 people were killed by bullets in their body. Now, technically, that's completely true. That's what happened in Pittsburgh with the Tree of Life Synagogue, okay? But that's just to give you any context about what happened. They didn't just fall onto bullets or walk into bullets. Very often, the news about Israel is exactly that, where it's a little bit of an item, a little bit of truth, if you will, but without any of the proper context around it, leading you to really understand what that story was. With all my kids in my house, they've of course all brought their friends home over the years, and I'm sure many of you as well have had kids who've come to your house who you hadn't given birth to or adopted or made really part of your family, but they know that they have the key and they know where in the freezer you keep their favorite cookies, and they just show up when they'd like to show up. So my youngest daughter Neely has a best friend, Tamar. They've been best friends since they were 4, and Tamar's one of those kids, I'll come home and she's home, like Neely's not even home, Tamar's there. And 6 weeks ago, Tamar's father was murdered. Ari Fuld was Tamar's father. And he was knifed, I'm sure you all heard, right? Not far from where we live. And in his last moments, he shot at the terrorist, right? Who was trying to stab the ladies who sells falafel. So I read at least one headline, because I was involved in a completely different way in this. So I wasn't paying so much attention to the press. I was trying to keep, as involved as I could on more of a personal level and doing what we could. 16-year-old Palestinian shot by Israeli. Because technically, that's true. The snapper was 16 years old. The terrorist was 16 years old. But again, that's not what happened. I mean, that's what happened, but that's not what happened. Now, why does this matter? Why does this matter to Jews living here in the United States? Okay, it matters a lot because the impression that your average American has, remember, your average American is not in this room. The average American isn't going to come to a camera meeting or hear me. The average American maybe doesn't know Jews, maybe knows a couple here and there, but isn't involved with Israel. When he goes to the voting booth, it really has nothing to do with Israel. And the impression that they get is that Israel is a terrible country. The drip, 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 and we all need to go to the bathroom at some point, and I think it right? Women of a certain age, I apologize. But that constant feeding into the consciousness, Israel just isn't a good place. Israel's a place where they kill people just like willy-nilly, where they don't really have human rights, where like it's even apartheid, right? And all these like catchphrases that are supposed to get upset. You know who gets the most upset when Israel's called an apartheid state? Are South Africans. I guided a group of South African parliamentarians a couple of years ago in Israel. The very big guys, like they had once been in a tribe, like I was glad to be on their side of the street with them and not on the other side of the street. These were really serious guys. And they get really upset when Israel's called an apartheid state because they know what apartheid really is. And so it very much exists, but most people don't know. And it just gives this like niggling impression that Israel's a bad place. Now when it comes to Jewish kids, most Jewish kids, I assume, their parents try and raise them with at least a positive attitude about Israel. Jewish country, 6-day war, we've done all these marvelous things. And I find Jewish kids, especially on the campuses, but not only, or who come, like even on birthright trips, who come to Israel, who are okay with Israel despite, but not because. Like my parents told me I should love Israel and it's a Jewish country, but there's all these really wrong things that Israel does. And the same thing with Christian kids. We read Bible at home, God will bless you if you bless Jewish people. I want to live Israel, but, and we're seeing the results now. We're seeing the results now on campus. What's called, some of you may be familiar with the term, intersectionality. Okay, where every so-called victim has to have the back of the other victims. So you cannot be a lesbian Zionist anymore because the victims are the Palestinians, not the Israelis. So if you're gay, you have to be pro-Palestinian. If you're black, you have to be pro-Palestinian. If you're any of whatever people feel like they're a minority, you have to be against Israel. All right, and this is all converged on the campuses, but it's not only there. You feel it in the tenor of what's happening. Now, people will say to me, like somebody said to me last week, they came up and they were talking about the president. I really try to avoid politics because America is like so polarized. It's amazing. Someone came up to me and said, I understand that as an Israeli, the Israelis are happy with Trump. He moved the embassy, he's putting the sanctions back on Iran. Existential stuff for us, Iran, right? He's taking apart UNRWA, that big farce that's been out there for way too long, that's perpetuating a problem, not solving it. But how do you explain how he could be pro-Israel but an anti-Semite? Okay? Now, that kind of easy use of the words affect all of us. But people will say to me, the problem people have with Israel has nothing to do with the fact that you're Jews. It's political. It's territorial. Okay? What people feel about Israel is that you took land that doesn't belong to you. It belongs to another people. You've taken over another country. You've disenfranchised the indigenous people. You're trying to make excuses about it, but that's really the bottom line. And therefore, that's the problem with Israel. Except that when Iran talks about destroying Israel, it talks about the Jewish state. You know where the name Iran comes from, incidentally? Do you know why it's not called Persia anymore? Because in 1935, the Persian ambassador to Nazi Germany became a Nazi. He became very enamored of the Nazi ideology, and he changed the country's name to be Aryan, all right? Because that was an ethnic group in Persia, but of course now an Aryan is not an ethnic group. It's the Nazi, ideology, right? The superior race ideology. That's where Iran gets its name. The Mufti of Jerusalem and at some point in Palestine at the time, Husseini, was a major and ardent, there's been books been written about this, it was hidden for a while, but it's all out there now, a major Nazi sympathizer. He spent World War II in Berlin, and he had plans drawn up for a concentration camp in the land of Israel near Shechem, near Nablus. That if Rommel had not been stopped in El Alamein in North Africa, the Jews of the land of Israel would have gone the way the Jews of Poland went. All right? Something that also a lot of people know, and it just came out last year, that there were a lot of Jews from Israel who went to El Alamein and helped the British to disable and to do some things to the German tanks to stop them. They weren't allowed to talk about it because Churchill was very afraid that if the war looked like he was out there to save the Jews, the English would not be behind him. He was probably right, okay? And therefore they would say, okay, help us, but you can't take any credit for it because then it'll look like we're fighting to save the Jews and we can't do that, okay? So it only came out like fairly recently. That's a theme, incidentally, that you hear a lot. Okay, when it came to that. Don't forget, the white paper is what kept a lot of Jews from being saved from the Nazis and actually making their way to Palestine, the land of Israel, which is what the British had the mandate for. So there was a lot of these things going on. But that kind of convergence of, you want to call it jihadism or fundamentalist Islam, is not something new. With the Nazis, is not something new. It's not something of the last year or the last 10 years. This is something that is well over a century old, okay? Some of it you can trace back to oil and to a lot of the battles that were happening among the European countries to get oil out of the Middle East. And as we all say, Moses took the wrong turn and went to the one country that didn't have any oil in it, okay? Now we've got natural gas, but that's another story. And this is a very, very old alliance. And so what's happened, a lot of the anti-Israel sentiment is politically correct anti-Semitism, not all of it. It's way too easy to say that everybody who dislikes Israel is an anti-Semite. I have complaints about Israel. I live in Israel. I can give you reams of complaints about Israel, okay, and about the things that go on there. And Europe has their own issues with Israel. Some of them have to do with the fact that they're moving away from nationalism because they think that nationalism brought upon 2 world wars. It did not. It was imperialism, and I suggest highly, I just interviewed him last month, Yoram Chazoni, The Virtue of Nationalism, fascinating book, okay, where he says that imperialism is the danger, and Nazi Germany was imperialistic, and so is Putin, and so is Erdogan, and so is Iran, okay, so those are the dangers that are on the rise once again, from all kinds of different places. So Europe is probably upset with Israel because we're like, Jewish state, while they're busy getting one currency and no borders and all that. Like, we're always going against whatever everybody else is doing, it seems like. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talks about that a lot in his books as well. We're just always out of step. When you know, Jesus is all the rage and everybody's Christian, and so Christian on being Jewish, you know, so we just like, we never really make it where we want to go. So, and Europe also has an issue with Israel, which can be flat out, that if they portray us as doing to others what they did to us, they don't have to feel so bad about the 30s and 40s because we just went over and did the same thing to other people. Okay, so when you hear phrases, which you hear repeated a lot, 6 million Palestinians in the diaspora. Wow, what a sentence. Okay, because 6 million is not just a number, it's a number of ultimate victimhood. And diaspora is not the word for expatriates. I assure you that Irish Catholics living in Boston do not say we're in the Irish diaspora. Okay, diaspora is the particular word for Jews not living in the land of Israel. And over you get this. Now, that kind of sense here, I do not think Americans, or possibly even Europeans, are aware that what we're really fighting in many ways is a religious war. Look, this country was founded because of Christian religious wars in Europe. I don't even know if the kids know that anymore. This was founded as freedom of religion, from religion, whatever it is that you wanted. And the last 1,400 years have been battles in the Middle East and Europe, pretty much on and off between Muslims and Christians, with Jews just hanging on for dear life, and usually getting killed by whoever was in control. There are more Jews living in my town of Efrat today than were living in the entire land of Israel in 1099 after the Crusaders came through. Okay, that's how bad it is. And the reason that the Ashkenazi gene pool is such a miserable gene pool, I'm 100% Ashkenazi, so I can say this, right? Between Tay-Sachs and breast cancer and mental illness, is because of the few Jews that were left in Ashkenaz in Europe who married to each other and perpetuated a lot of these genes. When I hear the statistic that today, I read this just 2 weeks ago, 25% of Israeli 10-year-olds are the products of mixed marriages. Now, when I say mixed marriage in Israel, that means Sephardi Ashkenazi, okay? Which is great for everybody concerned, and they're also beautiful. Like the dark faces with the green eyes, magnificent, okay? Which leads me to also point out another lie that's out there, is that Israel's a racist country. Israel's the only country in the world that ever brought blacks in to save them and not make them slaves. Israel's not a white country. I assume all of you have been there. The half of Israelis who come in the early 50s because they get thrown out of the Arab world and are whites. You see all shades. But most people in America have never been to Israel. Truth is that most people in America have never been out of America. Over 60% of Americans don't own a passport. So vacation is loading up the RV and heading out west. And that's a very dangerous thing. Because they don't know what the world is like. They don't speak another language. They have no idea how America is viewed. And they rely for their information on the media. And not in their own eyes and their own impressions. Okay, my husband and I, whenever we can get it together, we try and go to Europe at least once a year to see other cultures, to see other countries. We always take a Jewish tour. Where were our people? What ghetto? What was going on here? Of course, it all ends in 1945. But to understand the bigger picture of what's happening. But most people here rely on the media. And when the media lies or obfuscates or does some things that are so egregious that you just want to scream, it's a much, much bigger picture, and it affects you as well. Can I say that what happened in Pittsburgh last Shabbat and the neo-Nazi that went in there was because of the media? I have no idea what his background is. I don't even, you know what? I blocked out his name because he doesn't deserve to have his name even mentioned. But he went in there and he said, kill the Jews, kill all the Jews. And he didn't care if they were Reform, as far as I know, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, he couldn't care less. A lot of the things that Jews are always arguing about, our enemies couldn't care less. When the Nazis put people in the oven, if you ate lobster on Yom Kippur or were a Ger Chassid, they couldn't have cared less. And we need to understand that as a people and some of the dangers that are around there, because the furthest right and the furthest left have one thing in common, and that's anti-Semitism. It's coming from both sides now. We're more aware maybe of the furthest right and of the fascist, and it's rearing its ugly head in a big way in Europe. And if you've been to Europe, if any of you tried to go to a synagogue or a Jewish center in Europe, it's a fortress. There are armed guards of whatever country is there, like SWAT teams. You have to show your passport or let them know ahead of time. I'm like, is that going to start happening? Is that going to start happening here? But it's not separate. The so-called political issues that Israel have are part of a religious, territorial, and cultural war. Something that took me a while to realize when I moved to Israel, because, I come from America. I'm like culturally a Christian, if you will. This is a Christian country, and that's how I see things in a Judeo-Christian way. Guilt, forgiveness, sometimes a lot of guilt, and not that much forgiveness, but that's, pretty much how we do it. In the Middle East, it's not like that. It's about honor and shame, and it's about humiliation. And the Shias and the Sunnis, who hate each other's guts for the last 1,400 years because of the Battle of Karbala, the last 1,400 years. And that's the problem with Iran and Saudi Arabia, all right? One is Shia and one is Sunni. And someone said to me, so Israel's friends with Saudi Arabia now, so we need to make this really, really clear. There are very few friendships in the world, and definitely none in the Middle East. What there are mutual interests. And the enemy of my enemy is usually also my enemy, okay? It's just that for this particular time period, we need to join forces because that enemy is bigger, all right? So that's what's happening in the Middle East, and to understand the Middle East, you need to understand that honor and shame issue is paramount. And so what we have, and the problem that we have in Israel is, yes, a religious war. It's the fact that Jews took over land that was once Islamic, and that will not be erased by any kind of peace treaties. That's just biding time until Israel's weak enough for the coup de grace. And it's also cultural, the idea that Israel had the temerity to win wars that were started against us, and that if we hadn't, we would all be finished. I don't think anybody has any illusion that if Israel loses a war, the country's done. There's no suing for peace, and there's no two-state solutions, and there's none of that. We're finished. Any war, okay? So there's that. And it's like this perfect storm of the religious and the cultural and the territorial. But it doesn't matter when it comes to how Israel is seen in America. There is no other country that the press is so obsessed with and gets it so wrong. Do an experiment one day. Take an article that's written about Israel, take out the word that's like bothering you. There's something there, you can't put a finger on it. Take out the words Israel or Israeli and replace it with something else. Mexican, American Indian, black, gay. Pick a group and put that in there, and then read it again. And if it bothers you and you say, wow, this is really, this is not fair, then you have an understanding of what's happening here. But most people don't have an understanding. And what happens is, and you can start to parse this for yourselves. Read an article where the other side, whatever the other side is at the time, is named and is given a picture and is humanized. There's a picture maybe of a mother crying or whatever it is. And the Israeli side or the Jewish side is not. In little subtle ways, the adjectives and the adverbs that are used, it's painting a picture of a country that is essentially on probation. Like, if Israel just does one more thing, like, how many people in the world would really care if anything happens to Israel? Now, everybody should care, because if Israel didn't exist, the Western world would have to invent her, okay? There is no other country in the Middle East that the West can depend on in terms of, let's say things go south in the Persian Gulf, that votes with the United States for sure in the UN, that has free press, that has a very, very vibrant democracy. I'll only tell you how vibrant our democracy is. But we're punished for that. Because what happens is that you can go to Israel and you can report pretty much anything you want. And I've had more than one journalist say to me, I love covering Israel. It's the only place you can cover a war zone and be at the American Colony Hotel in Jerusalem at 5 for happy hour. Really? Really? Okay? Because most journalists are lazy. They really are. They just want the easy story. And you don't know that a lot of the news they're getting, if the news is, let's say, from Gaza or from within, let's say, the Palestinian autonomous areas, they have stringers in there. They're not going in there themselves. And their stringers are not named Moshe Cohen. That's not who they're getting their information from. And even if the stringers would want to be honest, they're not going to be, because then they will get killed. All right? Because I've had some of the most interesting and meaningful conversations in my life have been with Muslim Arabs in Israel, where they've told me the truth, because they know that I just want things to be good. And I could get them killed if I wanted to. If I recorded some of the conversations and reported them to their whoever's, I could easily get them killed. It never occurred to me to do that. I've got all my skin in this game. I want there to be peace in Israel. I want it to be quiet. I want everybody to do just fine. And they know that. And the only way that we're gonna get to that point is if you find out what people are really thinking. And most people in the West don't understand how intimidating a lot of the press is. It comes out occasionally after the fact, okay? When, like, the last official war in Gaza 4 years ago, when afterwards journalists said, oh yeah, like, we saw them shooting missiles from under kindergartens and under mosques. We couldn't say anything because then they would kill us or not allow us access, either one, okay? So a month later, after the war is over, they come out with that, but it's too late. It's too late. The impression has been made. The corrections, what they said, the impression was made that Israel was just randomly killing people and wasn't, and wasn't fighting an enemy where they put their children in front of them and are willing to sacrifice their own children, while Israel is doing everything else to help that. Articles, for example, on a woman with cancer, let's say from Gaza, who's not being allowed to go to Ichilov Hospital in Tel Aviv. Okay? Like, we just want people to die of cancer. A couple of points. One is, it's a lot of times not mentioned, but we know that her son belongs to Islamic Jihad and he's planning on smuggling a weapon in or something with his mom. Or two, how about the bigger question? Why does she need to go to Tel Aviv to the hospital? With all the billions of dollars that have been pumped in, why don't they have a state-of-the-art hospital of their own? Right? That's a bigger question, which would need a little more analysis and a little more intellectual honesty, and someone to understand this situation a little bit deeper than the first paragraph. And that's never, or I should say rarely, ever presented. And it affects you, because any time that the media is going to make Israel look bad, it also makes, in general, Jews look bad. Because like it or not, Jews are associated with Israel. It's the Jewish country. And this kind of, just this hatred that's out there is so dangerous for everybody. We don't know what the history books are going to write, right? Prophecy is given to fools and to little children, and I'm going to assume everybody in this room is neither, okay? So we don't know if the history books are going to say that Pittsburgh was the first of, Pittsburgh was the shot across the bow, Pittsburgh was the first time the Jews realized that the open door policy that is such a part of who we are, to welcome people and have people come in, had to end because there was too many dangers around, as we have in Europe? Or was it a one-off horrible thing that woke everybody up, where we said, no, we can't have this happen. We can't go this way. We've seen this movie before, and the definition of insanity is doing or seeing the same thing and expecting it to end differently. Okay? It has to end differently. It has to, but it's not going to end differently just by everybody singing Kumbaya and saying psalms and having vigils. And I was at quite a few of those in the last couple of weeks. And they were important, and the interfaith meetings were important. And I spoke to a group that included many Christians and many Muslims, and that was super important because I still believe that most people are good, but most people are misinformed. And most people have pressures that we don't know about. We kind of project our way of thinking onto everybody else. We know it's not true, but we kind of do it anyway. I've been married for a long time, so I can tell you this is exactly what happens, okay? Like, I just assume that he knows how I'm feeling and thinking, and he hasn't a clue, okay? His mother died a long time ago, so I can't even say anything. Like, really? Where was this? What happened here? But you, at some point, you realize, like, this is, you know, this person has their own worldview. This nation has their own worldview. This religion and culture has their own worldview. You have to realize that. They're not saying things the way that we do. Where democracy and free speech is valued, but we shouldn't be punished for having free speech. The countries all around Israel get very little criticism unless they make the mistake of having journalists that they don't like go into an embassy and coming out in a duffel bag, okay, and that gets out there because Erdogan was very, very smart on how he played that for his own reasons. What happened with Saudi Arabia and Khashoggi a couple of weeks ago. You have to understand what's happening here. We want there to be freedom. We want people to be able to be critical. I'll even say, this is a stretch for me, that maybe it's good that there's a Haaretz. Because it shows that really Israel doesn't shut anybody down. Because what country would let sometimes that kind of stuff come out? But we shouldn't be punished for that. Okay? We shouldn't think to ourselves, gosh darn it, that totalitarian neighbor of ours doesn't have the problems we have, and he just shuts everybody down. That's not the way we want the world to go. Right? And one of the problems that Israel has in making its case is that a lot of Israel's case has to do with intelligence. Like the dissidents in Denmark last week who were targeted, you know, the Iranian dissidents who were targeted, that was Israeli intelligence that tipped them off that they were in trouble. And Israeli intelligence is a major reason why there hasn't, thank God, been another 9/11, which was an act of war. It was a casus belli on American soil. But everybody's forgotten, or most people have forgotten about that. Okay, but that was Islamic jihadism attacking America. 17 years ago. That means the kids that are graduating high school, the kids that are going to be in college next year, weren't even alive when that happened. Right? And everybody's like forgotten. So we have trouble making our case because when it's intelligence and you talk about it, it's not intelligence anymore, right? But there is so much that Israel does of value to the world, not just designer cherry tomatoes and high tech and Waze and all those wonderful things, okay, which are great. But, you know, and people will say to me, and they're right, great, you invented Waze, it means that I, you know, cut through traffic. But that really doesn't get you off the hook for slaughtering 50, you know, children yesterday, or whatever it is that you're doing. And when they looked at it from the way they're looking at it, they're right. They're right. That's not, but what if we didn't slaughter the 50 children? What if that's the impression you have and that's wrong? Like, you can care about Israel because, not despite. So what Camera is doing, you know, a lot of times people will say, but is Camera effective? You don't know the articles that weren't written because the journalists already know that there's a watchdog. One of my closest friends is an expert in counterterror. And one of the frustrations that he has when he's trying to get people to like give to camera systems that can protect different communities or whatever it is that he can't show them the headlines that weren't written because that family wasn't killed because of things that he did, right? So, you know, we all know, let's say about the Fogel family, right? The 5 people, the 3-month-old baby who was slaughtered like a chicken. But we don't know about the other Fogel families that, thank God, are still standing because of things that were done to prevent that. So, you know, the big headlines are what gets everybody all hot and bothered. But we need to also be doing preventative medicine and preventative things on the media. And that's a lot of what Camera does. It's not just getting them to give the corrections, in making sure that they didn't make the mistake to begin with. All right, and the New York Times came out last week. They finally had an article admitting that most of the biggest acts against an ethnic group in America last year were anti-Semitic, not against blacks and not against, people of gender fluidity or whatever you want to call it, okay? More than anybody else by far were acts of anti-Semitism. So this is going on, and it's been going on for a while, and last week it got into the headlines because of the scale and the sheer horror of it. But there are kids, I was just in Florida, there are kids at the universities there. If you have a mezuzah on your door, you can expect to find a swastika on your dorm door. Why is that okay? And a lot of the kids going to campuses, they don't want to deal with this stuff. They're going to college. They actually want to get an education, even though there, everything is about the safe spaces instead of being challenged. And you should be challenged. Everything is about not making people uncomfortable. You should be incredibly uncomfortable in university. You should be thinking about everything and reading through it all, not like sheltered and not, get upset. Because that's not the real world at all. But you get to college, you just want to get an education. If you're there for Shabbat, you'd like to go to Hillel. But if Hillel is looking a little like maybe dangerous or you're not sure, or there's Israel Apartheid Week, and if you walk around with like a Magen David on, or you actually man a booth that's pro-Israel, you're going to get intimidated and maybe even violently. You have to be really gutsy to then get out there and do the Israel advocacy, really gutsy. And I can't blame the kids for not being gutsy like that. Why should they be? They've been sheltered, most of them, all their lives. And why do they want to get into that with somebody? What advantages? So they just lay low, and they don't go to these functions. That means they also don't meet other Jewish kids, and they don't see other people like them. And it spirals, and it snowballs. And the picture is much, much bigger than we'd like it to think. And really now is such a critical time. So I think I've spoken enough. I'm here to take questions, and Tracy's here to answer questions about camera if you have them. Yes, sir.
It seems like, obviously, disinformation, misinformation, we hold these truths to be self-evident, this is bad. But the real problem, it seems to me, is now that we have the internet, we have information overload. So everything passes under the radar screen. You can have all kinds of outrageous things, and things don't have a valence attached to them. One is an article, it's the same stuff.
Right, playing on both your houses.
Right,
yeah.
so that's the real problem.
Yes.
It seems this unclarity that comes from information overload. Do you have any thoughts about what can be done for this, or can camera do anything, or?
Well, so camera also monitors the internet, but this is where you come in, okay? There's 50 people working in an office, that's a drop in the bucket, okay? You all, assuming you're in this room because you wanted to be here and not because like your parole officer said, get into this room or you're making license plates tomorrow, right? You have to get involved, okay? And the easiest way to get involved is to write a check and have other people do the work. That's easy. But do more than that, okay? They have a whole letter writing campaign. You can also monitor things, okay? One of the biggest enemies we have is people saying, it's just too much for me. I'm just gonna literally switch the channel or turn it off. The Roman Empire dissolved because of something called panit kirkas, bread and circuses, okay? They had a lot of entertainment, gladiator games, it was in those days, and they had very cheap food and plentiful water, and so people were happy. Take a look around the West now, right? You can get your 2,000 calories a day at McDonald's for $5. Everybody's got a sports team they follow. Everybody's got their rock stars. Everybody's got the Instagram, whoever that they're out there. And nobody's paying attention to what's really happening. You need to not only pay attention, but become ambassadors for other people who aren't paying attention. Bring people to Israel if you can. I'm not saying that because I'm a tour guide. I'm a tour guide because I realized how important a tour of Israel is. Where you see for yourselves. I'll point out to people what I don't think they would notice on their own. We're stopped at a red light, and I see two women with baby strollers standing on the corner, and I can tell by how they're dressed who they are. So I'll say, you see the woman on the left in green with the scarf? So she's the Muslim. And you see the woman over there with like the babushka thing? So that's an Orthodox Jewish girl, okay? And they're standing there and talking, and one baby throws his pacifier down, and the other mother picks it up. And we're coexisting on a day-to-day basis, okay? And I point it out because it needs to be pointed out. Or go into an emergency room, only go to visit somebody who just had triplets. You should never otherwise go into a hospital, right? Or even one is fine. And you just see what's going on there, and you know, the interactions and the mutual respect. And it's in the real Israel. I have never, ever, in all the years I've been guiding, have somebody say to me when they got back on the plane that Israel disappointed them and that Israel wasn't much more complex and magnificent than they had ever imagined. It doesn't matter what religion they are or what country they were from or anything. Right? And that, go yourselves, but also encourage people to go. Because the trip to Israel, let's put it this way, we're in such bad shape when it comes to the media that it can't hurt. Okay? It's not going to turn anybody against Israel, I would assume, from where they are. Yes, sir.
I want to argue from the devil's advocate point of view.
Please.
Israel's hated. Israel's bad-mouthed in the press. All that stuff. There's the BDS movement.
Yes, which was
On the
never
other
about money.
hand- On the other hand, when you read, none of this affects the real world. Israel's relationship with China, with Russia, with the West, even with Europe, is very strong with real people, not
Not the government.
yeah, with real people. I have a theory, and my theory, as long as Israel has what the world wants, technology, as long as their economy is strong, as long as their military is strong, it really doesn't make any difference. It's almost like Joseph Goebbels, the greatest propagandist of ever. He couldn't convince the Germans they were winning the war when their cities were burned. So my question to you is, what I see with Israel is incredible. It's a remarkable country. There's no other country ever like it, not even this one. In the 7 years she's really been
Right.
expanded,
Right.
and the progress she's made in 7 years. So, does it make a difference what the world says or what the
Yes.
world does?
Yes, because you said it yourself, there's a discrepancy between the populace and the people running the show. The people running the show are the ones who ultimately make decisions. They're the ones who invest in Iran. Okay, they're the ones who do a whole lot of other things, like look at the UN when it comes to Israel. Okay, Nikki Haley notwithstanding. The UN, which is representative of the world, has it in for Israel. And so, and I'm not so sure that your average European even knows what's happening. You know, there's a fascinating thing that a couple of years ago that I read. At least 10, and I remember the ones that alliterate, May, Merkel, and Macron, leaders in Europe have no children. Which is fascinating, because they are making decisions about a future in which they have no personal stake. Now, everybody in this room who is a parent knows that there is nothing as life-changing as having children. And Israel has the highest birth rate in the Western world. Now, leave me aside for a second. 3.5 children a family, 3.5 family, that's the Jewish one, and it's not because of the ultra-Orthodox, because the ultra-Orthodox rate is actually dropping as the women go out to work. Okay? It's a happy country, and it's a country where family and faith, and I'm saying faith and not religion, but faith and family are very strong, which is, it used to be what America was like. So I think actually that the West has a lot to learn from Israel. I think Israel is an incredible place. But the discrepancy between the place that it is and the impression that people have, and even if, let's say there is a leader of a country who knows that Israel's a great place but is not voting that way, of course that has an effect. We still live in a real world. If we don't have a trade agreement with the country, we don't have a trade agreement with the country. And BDS, since you mentioned it, was never really about the money. It was about bad-mouthing Israel and slandering Israel. Okay? It has had an effect economically on some of the smaller players, like the farmers, who suddenly can't export their spices and their flowers and their dates to different countries. I don't think it's had an effect on the high tech, because as you said, they want ways, and they want, you know, every single high tech company in the world has their R&D in Israel, because you get so much bang for your buck. And Israel files more patents than every year than all of Europe together. So Israel is a superpower in many ways. So why is there this huge difference between what we know of Israel and what most people would think? Just take a look at some of the elections happening tomorrow. right? Some of the people standing for office in this country are flat out anti-Semites. They're not, there's one guy out west whose name is West, in Nebraska or something. His kids came out against him a couple days ago. They said, don't vote for our father. Do you know what I'm talking about? He's an anti-Semite. And he's like, oh, my ex-wife turned them against me. But he has stuff that, which is possible also, they're not mutually exclusive. But there's stuff out there. Now, these things are shocking. You never would have seen these things a few years ago. All right? So it does make a difference because the state's policy will be different. And there's also a lot of cooperation between states, like Boston, for example. Israel's created a lot of jobs in Boston. Okay, a lot of companies that have, Israeli companies that have opened up in Boston. And each state also, it's not just America that has relations with Israel, each state also does. And creating jobs and things like that. Where's that going? Congress has been a very big friend of Israel's consistently. Is that going to change now? And I don't want to get partisan, and I hope it needs to be. I actually feel it needs to be a bipartisan issue. It'd be terrible if it's just one party in America that's pro-Israel and the other one isn't. Okay? But where is this going here?
That's the way it is.
Okay, so, but I'm just saying that these are things that have been happening over the last few decades, and there's a source for that. And a big part of that funnel is the media, and wherever you cannot give up. You cannot give up. Like, I don't know if what I'm doing is affecting anybody. I really don't. Okay? I was like the quietest, had no self-confidence person until I moved to Israel. I'm not joking. I met somebody like who I knew years ago who said, you're the last person I ever thought would be doing what you're doing. Okay? But a tremendous motivator was keeping my children safe. You know, I've washed my children's dog tags. That is a terrible thing to have to do. All right? Because you know what that means. But I also know that we have to have an army and we have to protect our country. And this is something, if I can do something to protect my children, then that's something that I have to do. But you all are in this, all right? If you're sitting in this room, this is your game as well. And you have to somehow get involved, and this is a great place to start.
Well, and just on that, I mean, this is just my opinion. I think it has to matter. It has to matter what people are saying about us. It has to matter what people are saying about Israel, and if it doesn't matter to us,
Not gonna matter anybody else.
it's gonna matter to. So I guess I just don't think I don't think anything good can come of us just saying, well, it doesn't matter, it'll all be okay. No, we have to fight.
I was wondering if either of you have had any contact with the local paper here, the Philadelphia Inquirer. I know that Steve Feldman, the local COA, had said they had met with people from the Inquirer, and as of this point, it does not seem to have been productive. I know I recently read an article that was similar to one that you were saying, like that.
No context.
No context.
They fell on the bullet, yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. Any.
So we have, so I'm always good at saying when I don't know all the information, so I'll tell you what I know, and then
Yeah.
I can actually put you in contact with the analyst that handles that. So I'm not the person that deals with the local paper, but we have an analyst that has a relationship with the local paper. And again, they could speak volumes to exactly what that relationship has, how it has transpired over the course of time. I wish I were the person to speak to about that, but I'm not. The one thing that I do know, just speaking generally, is that I've been amazed since I've worked at Camera. I was involved with Camera before I worked at Camera, but now that I work there and see everything much more closely, it's amazing to me how much the papers don't like corrections. They don't like being told that they have actually made a mistake. They don't like being called out on it. So every time we point out that there's a correction that needs to be made, it does have an impact. And shockingly, we actually have, with so many of the papers, good relationships with the journalists, even if they're still not telling the truth and delivering the facts. So I'll get your information after we're done, and I can put you in contact with the person who deals with that paper, because what I'm wondering is if their experience has been that the paper is actually friendly in their relationship with us.
Yes.
Hi, I have a tough question, but first I have to say I'm a firm believer in Camera and what it does. It does critically important work in the media in America, and I know this because I've written op-eds and things like that and countered different things, sent it to Camera. I've also encountered many Israel advocates and say, rather than forming your own new committee, be a representative for Camera in your community, because I think it's critically important what Camera does. And with that, let me deal with a tough question I had. On the ride here, I was talking with my brother, who threw a curve at me, talking about Gaza, and that they don't have water, and made the comment, and this is my brother, and by the way, he lived in Israel and was a paratrooper, and now he's in Taos, New Mexico, and he gets information, pieces here and there, and he made the comparison, I don't want to see Israel like Nazi Germany, because what they're doing, and I said, listen, I know that Israel supplies food, medicine,
Every
oil,
single day.
right,
Every single day.
Kogat, and it's documented there. I don't know exactly what he was referring to about the water, but apparently there's things there. I said, what was Gaza like before 1967 under Egyptians? How much different is it now? I said that I knew when I was in Israel last week that Israel made arrangements for deliveries and Hamas accepted it, and then they reversed what they were going to do and started talking about war. And I said that for the last 6 months or so, there's been a low-level war coming from Gaza to the territories around where fields are being burned. But, it's my
Look,
brother.
Gaza's a miserable place, but it's not miserable because of Israel, it's miserable because of Hamas. But
Right.
nobody's gonna say that because you don't really wanna take on Hamas. And so, it's easier to take on Israel. It's always easier to take on Israel and the Jews. We'll write scathing letters to the editor, which is what a lot of this is all about. But the stakes get higher. You can ask, some of the people who have come out against that culture. And some of them, like Theo Van Gogh, who didn't make it, who was coming out with a film. All right, so we need to also help them to be able to get the truth out. But Gaza is a thing, and we can just sit and talk about Gaza for a long, long time. And what went wrong there, and the internal Palestinian issue between Fatah and Hamas, okay? Let's just say Mahmoud Abbas, who's the head of the Palestinian Authority, and wrote his master's thesis on Holocaust denial. If you're wondering how that twain meets, he is the last person that wants Israel to leave Judea and Samaria, West Bank, whatever you call it, because Hamas will take over, and he's Fatah. So every time Israel, arrests terrorists, he's delighted. Because Israel's doing his dirty work for him, right? It's very complicated, and it's a whole other conversation.
So I'm gonna just interject for a second. Eve is actually speaking tomorrow in New York, so we have 5 minutes left with Eve, so we're gonna take two more questions. Before we do that, before I just cut it off, we'll take 2 more questions. Each of you, when you sat down, you'll notice that there was a little pamphlet at your seat. I would encourage you to look at the pamphlet. I'd ask you to make as generous of a contribution as you can. I would love to have you all more involved in what we're doing. We obviously need the financial contributions. We also need the letter writers. I'm looking to have people volunteer to head up our like a local Philadelphia board that can help me put on more events like this, that can help us get more people active in making corrections to inaccuracies that we find in the news. So while we're taking these last 2 questions, if you can fill out the booklet, get it back to me, talk to me after Eve goes to catch her train. I'm happy. I'll be around to take questions.
Planes, trains, and automobiles. Yes, ma'am.
I look at this from the perspective of respecting Rabin, respecting the Israeli entrepreneurs who work with young Palestinians in the late 1990s and the early 2000s in giving them education and IT training. The world in Israel, unfortunately, and I have family there, as the world has changed under Mr. Trump, the world has changed under Mr. Netanyahu. He has presented an image of Israel that I find disgusting. And we can't relate to that the way we could relate to Rabin. Israel isn't taking the high road, as Trump is relating to the lowest form and the lowest life. It seems like Netanyahu wants to stay in power, and he's going to the right to do it. And that's destroying my faith and love of Israel. It's not the Israel that I loved and grew up with, and every Israeli Independence Day we went to Center City and celebrated. I'm embarrassed by this man.
Okay, so,
That's my problem.
and your impressions of Mr. Netanyahu come from where?
Pardon me?
Your impressions and your opinion
From
of
hearing him
Mr.
speak. He came to Washington to try to convince Congress not to approve the Iran treaty.
That done?
That's
That done?
Because I really don't want to get political, however, yeah, I know, but I
Power
just,
is seductive.
okay.
And those who have power want
Okay.
to try and keep it.
So,
I'm just
wait a
curious,
sec, I just
what
want,
do you
wait,
think-
ladies
what
and
do you
gentlemen,
think-
let me
what
just
do
say
you
a couple
think the
things.
Iranians are gonna do with the nuclear weapon?
One sec, I just want to say a
When they
couple
say
things.
that to Israel attacking the United States.
Barbara, so first of all, I see how much it's hurts you, I really do. And that you love Israel and you're upset with the direction Israel's taking. So just a couple of things, okay? People say that power corrupts, absolutely, but there's a worse thing that corrupts even more, and that's powerlessness, okay? As the Jewish people, we have been there, okay? And I'm not standing here to defend Netanyahu, and there's many things that he does that I'm not happy either. He is the democratically elected Prime Minister of Israel. He didn't take control in a coup, and he's not a monarch. He was elected by the Israeli people because when you live in Israel every single day, you see things in a different way. You see your neighbors, you see the threats. You understand that when the Iranians stand up at the UN and talk about genocide against our country, they're not kidding, and nobody walks out of the room. And so again, I'm not going to stand here in defense of him or any of that. All I'm saying is to respect Israel as a democracy the way you would respect any democracy, and to understand where he's coming from. In an incredibly difficult situation, he needs to keep Israelis alive. And there's a lot of things that he has had to do that I'm sure he would rather not do, but we live in a very difficult part of the world. And I take people up to the Golan Heights, and I literally watch Syrians get killed. We're standing on Mount Bento, looking at the puffs of smoke, and I know that Syrians are being killed by their own president. And then I look the other way into Lebanon and the civil war of the Christians and the Muslims, and the Hezbollah has put missiles under kindergartens and under hospitals. Tempt Israel, I dare you, either your people will die or our people will die. This is the situation we're in. It's not fair. It's not right. It actually stinks, okay? And I understand that you want, and also we would all love to, everybody's happy in Israel and everybody's great and everybody's doing their own thing. But sometimes very difficult choices have to be made because otherwise you won't be around to hopefully have that era. And this is one of those difficult times because every single mishtar, every single government, if you will, around us that's been taken down, we've ended up with somebody worse, okay? So Saddam Hussein was awful, we got even worse. The Shah wasn't no great shakes, you wouldn't want him in the family, we got the mullahs, okay? Gaddafi was, ugh, all right? That's a real word. Libya is now a wreck. So every time that we get involved and we try and make it better, we end up with worse. And Israel's paying attention to that. And our neighborhood's getting worse and worse and worse. So I just ask you to have a little bit of, again, a little bit of respect for Israelis, for what we see that other people might not see, and to still care. So you might be caring right now despite and not because, but come back and keep, and look, and see how Israel does many, many wonderful things. I could just tell you, just one little example. My middle son, my number 4, is studying medicine in Italy, in Pavia. He wants to be a doctor. Israel has affirmative action, which means that even though Muslim Arabs are only 20% of Israel's population, they get 35% of the places in medical school. And they don't have to do the army, and their matriculation, exactly, and their matriculation exam is easier. So my son, who served for 4 years in the Israeli army, was a commander, and only started college at 23, had to go to Italy to get an education because his place was taken by Arabs. Now, I don't have a problem with Arabs being doctors. I had to have surgery a few years ago. I had an Arab surgeon, he was wonderful. That's not the issue. But this, what I'm talking about now, that maybe Israel actually discriminates sometimes against Jews in order to have other minorities do better, is not talked about. All right? And so I ask you to learn more. I can tell you a lot more of these things. And to not be so quick to judge Israel from a place I see as great thing, because when you care so much and you get disappointed, it hurts all that much more. If you didn't care, it wouldn't hurt. So I want to thank you for the fact that it's hurting you, because it means that you care. But I think with some more information, you might not be as tough on Israel.
Maybe you should mention the survey that was run a few months ago, or a month ago, about how happy the Israelis, 80% of the 80 or 86% of the Israelis are very happy with their.
We're happy because we also know that we're doing good things. And with that comes a tremendous sense of satisfaction, even when you don't get things. As a mother, I can tell you that.
I just have a very short
Sure,
story.
yes, and then I have to.
On your level, we just got back from Israel in the summer, fell in love with it. But we went to the Golan Heights with our guide and a Jeep driver, and the Jeep driver says, just go look over there, there's an Iranian tank. But I live in this kibbutz. It's very close. I can see the tank.
We have no wiggle room.
And he says, I was down for a month with my children underground when they were attacking us.
Exactly.
So I said to him, this Jeep driver, I said, why do you stay here with your family? He says, because I'm going to defend Israel.
Because it's home.
Because that's my home.
That's right.
And that's how they live.
That's right.
And how are we to criticize Israel?
Maybe we're all insane, but we feel we have no other place to go. And if we leave, what happens?
And what will happen to us if
Right.
there's no Israel? That's
Let's
what's
not
going
even go there. I actually am more worried about America at some point than I am about
I'm worried
Israel.
too.
Because I don't think Americans realize some of the dangers that are out there, and at least Israelis
And
do.
I expect our rabbis to speak like that, but we're not
We won't
hearing
talk
that.
about
We're not hearing that.
Okay, one more question, and then I have to get to the train station. Yes, ma'am. But I'll give you my card if you want. You can be in touch with me. I'm happy to
I'd
be in
like to
touch.
know whether you had any personal encounters with Salem.
With
or
B'Tselem?
Yeah, B'Tselem, or your children.
I have had debates with, like, Peace Now and people who I don't see eye to eye with, because Jewish groups come and they want to hear all sides, and I think that's incredibly important to do that. But one of the, if you already mentioned, I'll just end with this. A few years ago, it was actually many years ago, it was before I was even doing this like a lot, and then I realized how important I had to do it. I was in a debate situation with a Palestinian Arab and someone from Peace Now and me. And we were discussing whatever it was. We were discussing when everybody had left, including the guy from Peace Now. The Palestinian Arab said to me, I hate all Jews. I said, okay, I kind of got that, but why are you, reiterating? And he said, no, I want you to hear this. This is really important for you to know. He said, I hate all Jews. I hate you, but I respect you because you're a proud Jew. He said, the guy that just walked out of here, not only do I hate him, I don't respect him, and I don't trust him, because if he would turn against his own people, then he will definitely turn against mine. Now, up until that moment, especially coming from Los Angeles and liking granola and trees and everything, I was like, I didn't agree with Peace Now and with some of the things that they were promoting, but I was like, okay, it's good that what's happening here. And that made me heartsick, okay? And because, so some of my people are like useful idiots for the enemy? How does that work? And so there's a lot of it, and it's complicated, and so that's usually the realm in which I will meet them. Although we all have relatives and friends in Israel who disagree with us, and some people are married to people they disagree with. Somehow we've learned to be okay, all right? Like, I don't really think too many people get divorced in Israel because they voted for different people, which is something that I actually heard of here last week, okay, in America, okay, that I could not believe it. But you have to learn how to do that. And with us, it really is existential also. These are not small issues. But how boring would the world be if we all felt the same, right? But there has to be the way to have the discourse and have the respect. And in Israel, we're trying. It doesn't always succeed. Sometimes it fails spectacularly, but we are trying. But when my kids went into the army, and everybody thinks of the army as this amazing army, which it is, it also has social ramifications. My kids went into the army with kids that they otherwise would not have met. okay, from very different backgrounds, from very different political leanings, and they were gonna save each other's life like they were born twin brothers to the same parents. And that is a very important aspect of the IDF that I think most people don't understand, okay? Is that you learn to care about people that you would normally have nothing to do with. Because you're in this together, and it's your country, and you're defending it together, no matter what else is going on. And that's a very important aspect that I didn't realize until my kids were in the Army. That was good for them in that way. No, it wasn't good for them, there was a lot that was good for them. And it matures them very quickly. Compare an Israeli 24-year-old guy with an American 24-year-old guy, night and day. Night and day. Okay?
Thank you for all you do. And
Thank you for all you guys do.
Yeah.
If anybody wants a card, I have, but I would say be in touch with Tracy and she'll move you on to me. And thank you to our host for opening your home. It's really beautiful.
Thank you.
And you should only have joyous occasions in this country.
Thank you all for coming in. I'll be around to answer questions as we volunteer.